Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
Hello and welcome to Health Check from the BBC. This is the show where we scrutinise the latest findings in medicine from around the world so that you don't have to. I'm Claudia Hammond. Now, it's hard enough to deal with experiencing difficulties with your mental health, let alone the stigma that can accompany them.
Insanity as a ground for divorce, people being seen as cursed, bewitched, demon-possessed, and the derogatory language in reference to people with mental health problems. So stigma cuts across all facets of their lives.
We'll hear from mental health champions in Kenya and Ghana who are determined to speak out and reduce stigma. And is it possible to have too much free time? If only, you might think. More on that later. And I want to welcome back Matt Fox, who's Professor of Global Health and Epidemiology at Boston University in the US. Now, Matt, I thought we'd start with a roundup of what's happening with COVID infection rates around the world, because sometimes it's hard to keep up with what's happening everywhere. So, first of all, where are you most worried about now?
Well, there's a number of areas in Europe where there seems to be a lot of infection going on, particularly in areas in Serbia and the surrounding areas there, Slovenia and other countries. The United States is fortunately seeing a decline, but we're also going into the fall and winter when schools are reopening up in the north. So we do expect to see some incline there as well.
And there's been some new predictions out about what might happen in the winter in the US.
That's exactly right. There's a group that has been put together that brings together all of the modeling approaches that have been done in the United States to advise the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And they've actually have some optimistic projections for the winter, that they actually think that that the rates of infection in the winter are going to be nothing like what we saw in previous winters, where we saw these large increases, partly due to vaccinations increasing, but also even in places where rates of vaccination are not that high. The Delta variant is so infectious that these earlier waves have hit so many people that there just aren't nearly as many people who are susceptible to the infection. And hopefully, if that holds up, it means the winter is going to be much better than in previous years.
So there are places where that famed herd immunity could actually be being reached, maybe.
I think that's right. I don't think we're going to get to the point where we'll have complete herd immunity because, as we know, even those who are fully vaccinated can still become infected. They don't tend to see the worst effects of the infection, but they can still get infected, and that means they can still transmit. But we think that's probably going to be much slower, and there are going to be far fewer. So it's going to become a much more manageable thing as we go forward.
Now, a few weeks ago, we were talking about whether clever incentives might encourage more people to get vaccinated in countries where vaccines are available. And of course, most people are keen to get them, but a minority aren't. And we heard about some of the imaginative ideas that have been tried.
We are cautiously optimistic that the worst is over.
This is Kent Tu, president of Genting Cruise Lines, a cruise and resort company operating across the Asian Pacific.
In Hong Kong, a number of businesses have recently created opportunities to support Hong Kong government's call for mass vaccinations in the city.
Vaccine incentives across Hong Kong include prize draws for luxury apartments and cars, brand new flats, private flights, shopping vouchers, and even bars of gold.
24-hour butler service, complimentary dining, exclusive use of their pool and the gym.
Genting Cruise Lines' Super Seacation Sweepstakes gives vaccinated Hong Kong residents the chance to win up to 4 million Hong Kong dollars, and the grand prize is an all-you-can-cruise annual pass for 4 people. But vaccine incentives don't have to break the bank. In Melbourne, a group of independent cinemas has decided to offer people something irresistible: free snacks.
We decided to offer customers a complimentary popcorn if they could show us proof of vaccination or proof of having booked a vaccination appointment.
This is Rafa Tamir from Classic Cinemas.
Lots of customers come by and pick up their free popcorn with a big smile on their face, happily show their vaccine card. At the same time, we did receive quite virulent online attacks from anti-vaccination groups. Most of the community were very, very much behind us, and were very excited to see us take part in a promotion like this.
And some incentives don't need to be financial at all. They can be as simple as an invitation to a party. Adoma Patterson is the president of the Jamaican Canadian Association in Toronto, Canada.
There has to be some food, right? There's got to be some music. People are tired of being inside. We had a drummer. We had the Consul General for Jamaica, the Consul General for Trinidad and Tobago. They got their vaccines. We just created really a family feeling. It was a very, very beautiful experience. And you wouldn't say that around vaccines, right?
Samara Linton reporting there. So all sorts of things are being tried now. And of course, what we need is evidence about whether they work or not. But it's quite hard to actually get that during a real life pandemic, isn't it? Harder than it might sound.
It's incredibly difficult because these, if you want to call them experiments for these incentives, happen over large swaths of the population. And therefore, it's hard to figure out what would have happened if these interventions hadn't been tried. So like these lotteries tend to happen on the state level in the United States. Other things are changing at the same time, making it really difficult to figure out if things changed, if it's because of the incentive that's being offered, or if it's just due to changes that are happening due to other interventions like expanded vaccine access.
And did it work?
Well, it doesn't appear that it made a lot of difference. So what this research group did, and full disclosure, this was done by some researchers at the institute that I'm at. What they did was they looked at the vaccine rates both in the period before and the period after the $1 million vaccine lotteries were announced. But because they knew that vaccines were uptake was on the decline at that point across the United States, they also looked at what was happening across the wider United States where these incentives were not being offered. And so when they compared the period of uptake of a vaccine before the rollout of this incentive package to after, they did find there was a bit of an increase, once the incentives were offered. However, when you compare that to what was happening in the rest of the United States, where there was also these same changes, it looks like it really probably didn't have much of an impact. At most, it may have slowed some of the decline in uptake of vaccines that was happening at that point.
So is the issue that if somebody really doesn't want to have it, a lottery is not going to convince them?
I think that's exactly right. I think that these big incentives that are offered to, that are going to go to a very few number of people aren't enough to change people's minds, presumably in part because they don't think that their likelihood of actually receiving the payout is great. Whereas if you divided that up into much smaller amounts where many, many more people were going to get this bonus, even if those were small amounts of say $5 or $10, they may have more of an impact, but we don't know because that really wasn't tried anywhere.
Well, thank you, Matt, and do stay with us. Now, many people have struggled with their mental health during the pandemic, but still don't always feel free to discuss it, especially at work. Now, it is true that it has become much more common for high-profile celebrities and sports personalities to speak out about their mental health, which you may or may not find helpful. Yet, in many parts of the world, stigma does remain a problem, and discussing your difficulties at all is off limits. For many years in England, a campaign called Time to Change tried to change attitudes, and the evidence from that and other initiatives was used to launch campaigns in India, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya and Uganda in 2019. So, did they work? The results of pilot studies in Kenya and Ghana are now out, and I spoke to Rosemary Gavara, the Director of Basic Needs, Basic Rights in Kenya, and to Sue Baker, who's Mind's International Health Advisor, who has years of experience of anti-stigma campaigns, and she told me how these campaigns got going.
We started with what each local audience in each location across Africa and India understood about mental health, what the myths were, what the stereotypes were, looked at the cultural and social contexts, and obviously provision is very different. Many societies still see mental health as a curse, and we did measure whether we could do something about that. And we looked at whether some of the activities that had been successful, not just in England, but in parts of the global north, in high-income countries, could be adapted to each context and led locally by partners and people with lived experience. So that involved training champions and running social marketing campaigns, and people who were trained champions being supported to share their stories via something called social contact. And social contact is one of the most evidence-based, effective strategies to address stigma.
And so in Ghana, for example, there were people's stories were told on Facebook, and there were adverts on billboards, and people talked on local radio as well. And you measured whether there were changes in the knowledge that people had about mental health before and after these campaigns, and also whether their attitudes had changed or not. What did you find?
Baseline. We employed colleagues at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience at King's College London to use the same tools which were valid for use across the globe, assessing people's level of knowledge, people's attitudes to mental health. But actually, Claudia, what's more important is the intended behaviour scale, which is in future, would you be willing to live with, work with, continue a relationship with, or live next door to somebody with a mental health problem? So it's a quasi behavioural change indicators. And what we found was that after the campaign in Nairobi with BMBR, that there was a statistically significant improvement in levels of knowledge. And in Accra in Ghana, there was a statistically significant improvement in that intended behaviour, those four scales, to the extent of the level of change in Ghana after 10 years of change we saw in the campaign in England. So very, very big shift in Ghana. But what changed in both locations was an additional knowledge question that was added, where we asked people about whether they thought mental health problems were linked to a curse, and both significantly improved in both locations, which is one of the drivers of stigma, is this idea that it's a curse on your family. And I'm sure Rosemary will tell us more about that.
And it's interesting that there were differences between the different countries, because in Kenya, knowledge improved afterwards, but attitudes didn't change as much, whereas in Ghana, the knowledge actually went down slightly afterwards, but attitudes did change, and there was less desire to keep a social distance from people with mental health problems. That's odd that it was so different, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously the context is different, the level of awareness and conversation and initiative is different. And we did find that in England, with those three sort of scales, that some parts of the population could go straight to behaviour and intended behaviour change. Other people needed to go on that journey of improving knowledge in order to improve attitudes and then behaviour. So, communities and populations and audiences will change at different stages, and some can go straight to change and some need to go through the process of knowledge, attitude and behaviour change. But yeah, the differences are fascinating, and obviously the political landscape is very different. The mental health focus is very different in policies and service provision. So all of these things are factors. When you're delivering a campaign, you're doing it very much in the context of many other initiatives.
And a key part of it was having these champions talking about their own mental health. And here's the experience of one of those champions, which was recorded especially for Health Check.
Hello everyone, my name is Edwin Mboro from Nairobi, Kenya. I am 36 years old. I would say my struggles with mental health came to light in 2015, but actually I had struggled for so long without anybody noticing, or anybody, including myself, knowing that what I was struggling with was mental health. The only thing that made me think that something was off was I was heavily addicted to alcohol. I got a diagnosis of severe ADHD, anxiety, depression, and I'm also a suicide attempt survivor. So those were some of the issues that came to light in 2015. Now, before then, I had actually normalized everything. Everything was so normalized, even the suicide attempt. It was just swept under the rug, and I was in denial because I remember telling my treatment team that in my family we don't have crazy people when they talked about depression and ADHD, because that is how our society is. That's how the society is right here. So one of the biggest challenges that we face is stigma. And it has been from being called names to addict to, a crazy person, to the guy who went for mental health treatment, all those names. And it's quite painful, but a stigma for me has made me realize that I can't keep quiet, because if I keep quiet, I'll just enable people to perpetuate stigma more. Because personally for me, I'm an accountant by profession, I am a husband, I am a father, and the fact that I've gone through mental health issues do not stop me from being who I am. Thank you so much.
Edwin sharing his story there. So, Rosemary, Edwin was talking about how society, in a way, had, for him, seemed to have swept these issues under the rug. In Kenya, what are the potential implications of having mental health issues and speaking about them openly?
Yeah, we are very privileged to have champions like Edwin who publicly speak about their lived experience to challenge stigma. Now, stigma is like an indelible mark that long outlasts the symptoms of a mental health problem. Even when somebody has recovered, the stigma stays. Somebody is viewed as less capable to make decisions, less worthy of responsibilities, and just generally less able than others. Even in the laws that we have, it's reflected. For example, we have laws like somebody of unsound mind is not fit to hold public office, maybe incurable insanity as a ground for divorce, people being seen as cursed, bewitched, demon